The FBI's secret files on Marilyn Monroe. They reveal some of her friends were suspected communists, and she once considered traveling to the Soviet Union. The FBI kept files on her from 1955 until her death in 1960.
For over 60 years, the official story is that Marilyn Monroe's tragic death was a probable suicide. We've all heard it: the beautiful, troubled star, crushed by her own demons, took her own life. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's a carefully constructed lie? There's a hidden detail in the original autopsy report, a detail that's been debated for decades, that doesn't point to suicide, but to something much darker. This is the evidence that suggests Marilyn Monroe was murdered. On the morning of August 5, 1962, the world woke to the shocking news: Marilyn Monroe, the star who defined Hollywood glamour, was dead at 36. The first officer on the scene, Sergeant Jack Clemens, described an unsettlingly calm picture. He found Monroe in her Brentwood home, naked, face down on her bed, clutching a telephone. Her bedside table was a pharmacy of pill bottles, including an empty container of the powerful sleeping pill Nembutal, prescribed just days earlier. The story that formed was one of simple tragedy, not mystery. The Los Angeles County coroner, Theodore Curfey, ruled the cause of death as acute barbiturate poisoning, and the manner as probable suicide. This narrative seemed to fit what the public knew of Monroe. She'd spoken openly about her battles with depression, her history of substance abuse, and even previous suicide attempts. Just weeks before, she'd been fired from her film, Something's Got to Give, and the studio had publicly thrown her under the bus. The narrative was heartbreakingly simple: a fragile star, broken by fame and her inner demons, chose to end it all. The official report, backed by the coroner's inquest, painted a picture of a depressed woman who took too many pills. The toxicology report was damning, showing massive, lethal levels of barbiturates in her system. The coroner declared the drugs were likely swallowed all at once, in one gulp or in a few gulps over a minute or so, which seemed to shut down the idea of a slow, accidental overdose. With that, the case was essentially closed. The world mourned an icon, and the story of Marilyn Monroe, the beautiful, broken star, was set in stone, but right from the start, some felt the story was too neat. Sergeant Clemens himself later said the death scene looked staged. He thought the peaceful position of her body was odd, totally inconsistent with the violent convulsions that usually accompany a fatal overdose. He also questioned the absence of a water glass, which seemed strange for someone who had supposedly gulped down dozens of capsules. These were small details, easily brushed aside at the time, but they were the first cracks in a story that would eventually start to crumble. The official story was straightforward, but the facts, as they slowly came to light, were anything but. The world accepted it was suicide, but the evidence left behind began to whisper a different, more disturbing story. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Thomas Noguchi, a deputy medical examiner at the time. His boss, Coroner Theodore Curfey, assigned him the case, a decision some found unusual for such a high-profile death. Dr. Noguchi was a meticulous pathologist, and his examination would become the central battleground in the war over Marilyn's legacy. His initial findings confirmed the official cause of death: acute barbiturate poisoning. The toxicology report was stark. It showed 8 mg% of chloral hydrate and 4.5 mg% of pentobarbital, Nembutal, in her blood. The levels in her liver were even more telling: 13 mg% of pentobarbital. This pointed to a massive quantity of drugs, enough, as some investigators later noted, to kill 3 people. On the surface, this was powerful support for the probable suicide verdict, but then, Dr. Noguchi documented the detail that changes everything, the one piece of forensic evidence that directly contradicts the official story. When examining her stomach, he found it was almost empty. There was no residue from the pills. No undigested capsules. Crucially, he saw none of the distinct yellow dye from the Nembutal capsules that should have stained her stomach. This is the forensic paradox at the heart of the Monroe mystery. How does someone swallow 50 or more capsules, enough to create the astronomical drug levels in her blood and liver, and leave zero trace in their stomach? The official explanation, which Dr. Noguchi himself later supported in his memoirs, was that as a habitual user, her body would have absorbed the drugs faster. He also noted that hemorrhaging in the stomach lining was evidence that the drugs were, in fact, taken orally. However, many other forensic experts find that explanation hard to swallow. The sheer volume of capsules needed to reach those toxic levels would almost certainly have left some trace, no matter how fast they were absorbed. To swallow that many pills without leaving a single speck of residue or dye is considered by many to be a forensic impossibility. Plus, as Officer Clemens had noted, there wasn't even a glass of water by the bed. How did she get them all down? This single, glaring contradiction, lethal drug levels in the blood, but a clean, empty stomach, drives a stake through the heart of the simple suicide story. It raises a terrifying question: if Marilyn Monroe didn't swallow those pills, how did they get into her body? The autopsy proved what killed her, but the physical evidence left a gaping hole in how she was killed. This wasn't just an unanswered question, it was a direct challenge to the entire investigation. It suggested that the means of death was not what the world was told, and it opened the door to a much more sinister method of administration, one that couldn't have been self-inflicted. The forensic evidence was a puzzle. Lethal drug levels in the blood, but an empty stomach. On top of that, Dr. Noguchi's detailed external exam found no fresh needle marks on her body, ruling out a typical injection. So, if she didn't swallow them and wasn't injected, how did a fatal dose of drugs get into her system? For years, this question fueled countless conspiracy theories. Then, a fringe but forensically consistent theory began to emerge, one that tried to explain all the contradictions: a fatal enema. This theory is speculative and isn't supported by official investigations, but some researchers believe it's the only explanation that fits the bizarre facts. It suggests the lethal dose of dissolved barbiturates was administered rectally. This method would explain everything. It bypasses the stomach, which is why Dr. Noguchi found no pill residue or dye. The drugs would be absorbed rapidly into the bloodstream through the colon, leading to the sky-high concentrations found in her blood and liver. And it would leave no needle marks. Some support for this theory points to a detail in the autopsy: a purplish discoloration on Monroe's colon. While the official report didn't make a big deal of it, some theorists argue this could be evidence of irritation caused by a chemical enema. In his biography of Monroe, author Donald Spoto proposed a version of this theory, suggesting an accidental death. He speculates that her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Green's son, told her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, to give her a chloral hydrate enema to help her sleep, not knowing she'd already taken Nembutal. The combination proved fatal. In that scenario, the death was a horrible mistake, followed by a panicked cover-up to stage a suicide. Whether it was an accident, as Spoto suggests, or murder, as others claim, the enema theory is one of the few that tries to reconcile the major contradictions in the forensic record. It explains the high toxicity, the empty stomach, and the missing needle marks. It is a deeply unsettling possibility. And most importantly, whether it was an accident or murder, an enema isn't something a person could easily administer to themselves in a suicidal state. It implies someone else was there. The moment you consider this theory, you're no longer talking about a probable suicide. You're talking about a potential homicide, or at least, a death where Marilyn Monroe was not alone. An investigation is only as good as its evidence. In Marilyn Monroe's case, the forensic puzzles were made worse by an even more troubling problem: key evidence started to disappear almost immediately. Many see this not as simple sloppiness, but as a sign of a deliberate, systematic cover-up. The most critical missing items were the organ samples taken by Dr. Noguchi during the autopsy. He had requested that the liver, kidney, stomach, and intestines be saved for more detailed toxicological tests. These tests could have settled the debate, but they never happened. While tests on her blood and liver confirmed the overdose, the other organ samples, slides, and physical materials were disposed of before further analysis could be done. Dr. Noguchi later admitted he regretted not pushing for more extensive testing, acknowledging it could have cleared up the controversy. According to Noguchi and others, the samples weren't nefariously stolen, but were discarded as part of standard procedure once the head toxicologist determined further tests were unnecessary, a decision that has fueled speculation ever since, but it wasn't just physical evidence that went missing. Marilyn Monroe's detailed phone records for the weeks leading up to her death also vanished. In a time before digital logs, these paper records were the only way to prove who she was talking to in her final hours. Their disappearance left a massive hole in the investigation. Then there's the story of the Little Red Diary. Many people close to Marilyn claim she kept a small diary with intimate, and possibly politically sensitive, details about her life and her famous lovers. Sergeant Clemens saw no diary at the scene. But others, like private investigator Fred Otash, who claimed to have bugged her home, insisted it existed. If it did, it was gone before police arrived, another piece of the puzzle lost forever. Even official files weren't safe. Years later, Freedom of Information Act requests for FBI files on Monroe revealed that many documents were heavily redacted or missing. While the FBI says they never investigated her death as a murder, their surveillance of her is well documented. The fact that files related to her and her powerful connections were either destroyed or blacked out only deepened suspicions that government agencies were involved in managing the story after her death. The pattern is hard to ignore. Tissue samples, phone records, a potential diary, and government files, all crucial pieces, were taken off the board. The 1982 District Attorney's Review later noted that a murder would have required a massive conspiracy and cover-up. For many, the trail of vanished evidence is proof that such a cover-up is exactly what happened, designed to protect powerful people and bury the truth of what happened on August 4, 1962. For 2 decades, the probable suicide story held, but the questions never went away. Public pressure, fueled by books and articles, grew so strong that in 1982, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, under John Van de Kamp, reopened the case. It wasn't a full criminal investigation, but a threshold investigation to see if there was enough credible evidence of foul play to launch one. For those who doubted the official story, it was a glimmer of hope. The DA's office spent over 3 months reviewing the evidence, including original reports and 5.5 hours of audio tapes from the 1962 inquest that had been locked away for 20 years. The final 29-page report was released in December 1982. The conclusion was a huge letdown for many. The report stated it found no credible evidence supporting a murder theory. It upheld the original finding of probable suicide as reasonably supported by the data. DA John Van de Kamp publicly said he hoped Marilyn Monroe would finally be permitted to rest in peace. However, buried in that same report was a stunning admission. The review acknowledged the case was plagued by factual discrepancies and unanswered questions. While sticking to the original verdict, the DA's office admitted to the very inconsistencies that had bothered investigators for years. They didn't solve the contradictions, they just said the loose ends weren't enough to prove murder. The report basically said, the official story is full of holes, but we can't prove it's a lie. The review also addressed how complicated a murder would have been. The report argued that a homicide would have required a massive, in-place conspiracy, involving everyone from the killers to the housekeeper, the coroner, the autopsy surgeon, and top police officials. To the DA's office, that seemed too far-fetched. But to skeptics, this wasn't a refutation, it was a description of exactly what they believed happened. The sheer scale of the cover-up, they argued, pointed to perpetrators with immense power. So, the 1982 review, meant to end the debate, did the opposite. It officially validated the mystery. By admitting to the unanswered questions, the DA's office gave legitimacy to the doubters. They confirmed the official story wasn't as solid as it seemed. The case was closed again, but the mystery was more alive than ever. We're exploring one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, and the story only gets more tangled. If you find these deep dives into history compelling and want more content that challenges the stories we've all been told, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have a lot more to uncover. Your support helps us keep asking the tough questions. If the forensics suggest a death that wasn't suicide, and the vanishing evidence suggests a cover-up, the next question is obvious: who had the motive and the power to pull it off? This is where the story leaves the lab and enters the shadowy world of power, politics, and organized crime. The two most persistent theories revolve around two of the most powerful forces in 1960s America, the Kennedy family and the Mafia. The Kennedy theory is rooted in Marilyn's well-documented relationships with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. While the exact nature of these affairs is debated, many biographers and witnesses claim she was involved with both brothers. Her iconic "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance in May 1962 is the most famous glimpse of this connection. According to this theory, by the summer of 1962, Marilyn had become a huge political risk. Feeling used and cast aside, she was reportedly growing desperate and angry, threatening to hold a press conference and expose everything. This is where the "Little Red Diary" theory comes in. It supposedly held notes from her conversations with the Kennedys, including sensitive state secrets. The motive, then, was to silence her to prevent a scandal that could have torpedoed the Kennedy presidency. Multiple accounts place Robert Kennedy in Los Angeles on the day she died, a claim he denied but which some witnesses, including her housekeeper Eunice Murray, later supported. Journalist Anthony Summers suggests that while RFK may not have been directly involved in her death, he was key to the cover-up, removing any trace of his connection to the scene. It must be stated, however, that official investigations have found no credible evidence to support these claims. Woven into the Kennedy theory is the Mafia. Mob boss Sam Giancana, head of the Chicago outfit, allegedly had ties to both Monroe and the Kennedys. This theory splits into two main paths. One is that the Mafia killed Monroe as a favor to the Kennedys, silencing a mutual problem. The other, more sinister idea, is that the mob killed her to send a terrifying message to the Kennedy brothers. As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy had launched an aggressive war on organized crime, relentlessly going after figures like Giancana and Jimmy Hoffa. According to this theory, the Mafia was furious. They had allegedly helped get JFK elected and felt betrayed. In this light, murdering the president's famous lover would be the ultimate revenge and a chilling warning. The plan, some speculate, was to kill her and frame it to implicate Robert Kennedy, disgracing him and derailing his crusade. Authors like Chuck Giancana, Sam's brother, have claimed the mob was directly responsible. Sensational claims have been made about hitmen being sent to her house. Like all the other key evidence, alleged tapes from bugs in her home that supposedly captured arguments and a struggle have never surfaced. And just like the Kennedy theories, it has to be stressed that there is no substantiated evidence proving Mafia involvement. What makes these theories so durable is that they offer a plausible motive that matches the scale of the alleged cover-up. A jilted lover or a random criminal couldn't make autopsy evidence and FBI files vanish. But the Attorney General's office or a powerful crime syndicate? They could. The Kennedy and Mafia theories remain speculative, but they offer the only answers to who that seem to fit the crime scene's bizarre contradictions and the investigation's trail of missing evidence. So where does that leave us? We're left with a collection of deeply unsettling truths. The official cause of Marilyn Monroe's death is probable suicide. That's what the record says. But as we've seen, this isn't a hard fact, it's a coroner's opinion based on incomplete and contradictory evidence. It's a judgment call that has been legitimately questioned for over 60 years. The 1982 DA's review, instead of settling things, gave official weight to the doubts, acknowledging the factual discrepancies and unanswered questions that plague the case. They found no credible evidence of murder, but they also couldn't explain the forensic anomalies that challenged the suicide verdict. We are left with the central, unshakable paradox of the empty stomach. A woman's body is filled with enough barbiturates to have required swallowing a huge number of pills, yet no physical trace of them was found in her stomach. This single point has fueled plausible, if speculative, alternative theories, like a fatal enema, a method that would almost certainly require another person's help. We are left with a trail of vanished evidence. Organ samples disappeared before they could be fully tested. Phone records were lost. A potential diary was never found. This pattern suggests that if there wasn't a murder, there was at least a massive effort to control the narrative right after she died, and we're left with powerful motives swirling around some of the most influential figures of the time. The theories involving the Kennedy brothers and the mafia last not because of hard proof, but because they offer the only explanations that seem to fit the scale of the mystery. They remain unproven theories, yet they provide a logic where the official story falls short. So, has the Marilyn Monroe mystery been solved? The title of this video is a challenge. The case hasn't been solved in a court of law. But maybe the mystery of why the official story is so unbelievable has been solved. The evidence doesn't point to a simple suicide. It points to contradictions, forensic impossibilities, and a pattern of concealment that makes the official verdict incredibly hard to accept. The story of a lonely suicide is clean. The forensic truth is messy, complicated, and deeply suspicious. The most likely conclusion is that the full story of what happened on August 4, 1962, has never been told. The probable suicide verdict may be the official account, but it is far from the whole truth. And that, in itself, is not good. What do you think happened? A tragic, lonely end? A medical accident that was covered up? Or something far more sinister involving the most powerful men in the country? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And thank you for watching.